Arden died in a dark alley for a broken creature no one else would touch. She woke in silk sheets, in a palace she'd never seen, beside the Alpha King everyone feared. She had no idea the pup she'd been feeding scraps to for 2 weeks, the limping, amber-eyed stray she'd quietly loved, had never been just a pup, or that the king was harboring a dark secret. The apex turning had begun, and someone was determined to make sure neither of them survived it. The pup appeared on a Tuesday, which was the worst day of Arden's week. Tuesdays meant inventory at the Russet Anchor, 6 hours in the damp cellar counting barrels with a candle that went out every time she breathed wrong. She was sitting on the back step eating a heel of bread when she heard it, a careful, uneven footfall in the alley. She went still. In this part of town, you learn to mind your own business, or become someone else's. But it was just a dog. Small, young, nosing through the kitchen garbage she'd set out, scraggly thing, dark-coated, rain-matted, ribs showing through the fur like rungs on a ladder. Its left hind leg dragged slightly as it moved, giving it a lopsided dignity that made her chest ache without warning. Then it lifted its head and she thought, "That's not a dog." Its ears were too sharp. Its eyes, amber, almost gold, lit with an intelligence that she'd only ever seen in wolves. Except this one was tiny, clearly starving, and it was now staring back at her with an attention that made the back of her neck prickle. She looked at the bread in her hand, the last of her dinner, then at the pup's ribs. "Good timing," she said. "I hate eating alone." She set the bread on the step and waited. The pup's gaze shifted between her and the food, then it stepped forward and nudged the bread back toward her hand. Arden blinked. The pup sat down, looking at her with those solemn amber eyes. "You first," it seemed to say. "You need it more." "Don't be ridiculous," she said softly. "I'm not hungry." Clearly unconvinced, the pup waited. So she broke the bread in half, kept one piece, and took a slow, deliberate bite. "See? Eating. Now your turn." The pup lowered its head, and the bread was gone before she'd blinked. Then it licked the step clean of crumbs, twice, making absolutely sure. When it sat back up, it sneezed, a mini explosion that shook its whole face. It blinked, amber eyes gone briefly wide and slightly crossed, then slid its gaze sideways as if checking whether she'd seen that. Arden tried not to laugh. Then its small, cold nose touched the back of her hand, barely a graze, before it turned and limped away, its lopsided gait swaying in the rain. "Come back tomorrow," Arden called out. The pup didn't stop walking, but one ear swiveled back, just for a second, before it disappeared around the corner. The pup seemed to always return on her bad days, which she chose not to examine too closely. She started leaving better scraps, proper meat when she could, clean, water in a bowl she left beside the step. Then came the night a customer put his hands where they didn't belong, while her boss insisted she'd misunderstood. Arden sat on the back step in the rain. She had grown up in the shallows, and she did not cry over things she could not change. But her eyes burned, her throat ached, and her hands wouldn't stop shaking. The pup appeared from nowhere and curled up against her leg, its thin body warm through her skirt. Then it turned, disappeared into the dark, and came back with something in its mouth. A small clutch of white daisies, somehow unmangled. It set them on the step beside her with a deliberateness that made her breath catch. As Arden picked up the daisies, the pup watched her with those big amber eyes, and something cracked loose in her chest that she'd been holding tightly for a very long time. She scratched behind its ears until her hands stopped shaking. The pup pressed closer, warm and solid, and Arden closed her eyes. Nobody had brought her flowers before. 3 nights later, she heard voices in the alley, sharp with drink and cruelty, and underneath them, that familiar uneven footfall, faster than usual, frightened. Arden was already running before she'd made a decision about it. Out the back door, around the corner, into the narrow dark. 3 men had the pup cornered against the warehouse wall. She knew the leather coats, knew the particular brand of casual menace in their posture. The pup stood its ground despite its bad leg, head low, teeth showing, but its whole body was trembling, and its ears were flat with a fear it was trying very hard not to show. Then it saw her. Its amber eyes found hers across the dark, and something fierce and aching rose in her throat. "Walk away," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. The largest man turned, looked her over with slow, deliberate appraisal. "This your mongrel? Damaged goods. We're doing you a favor." "You're blocking a public alley," Arden said. "Walk away." His smile spread slowly, like something spilling. His hand went to his belt. The first blade she didn't see coming. She took 7. The details came to her later in fragments. The cold shock of the first cut. The way her body refused to believe what was happening, kept trying to stand, even as her legs swayed. She heard the pup, frantic now, trying to reach her through the gap between the men's boots. She pulled him against her chest before the second blade found her, then the third, curling herself over him. His whole body was trembling, a high, thin sound she'd never heard before, but she pressed her cheek to the top of his head and held on. His amber eyes fixed on her face, enormous with something that broke her heart, while the world went strange and gray. Her last thought, clear as a bell: "I hope someone feeds you." She woke to the feeling of silk. That was the first wrong thing. Every surface in Arden's life was rough. Rough linen, rough wool, the rough grain of the tavern's floors. This was different, cool and smooth against her cheek. She was warm. She was clean. Someone had washed her, changed her clothes. How was she still alive? The thought jolted her eyes open. In front of her, a stone wall hung with tapestries, a fireplace large enough to stable a horse, furniture built for permanence and expense. Through an arched window, she could see towers. Palace towers? Panic flared in her chest. Arden sat up too fast, and the room tilted. She grabbed the bedpost to steady herself. Slowly. The voice came from somewhere to her left. Low, measured, with the particular quality of someone who was used to being obeyed. She turned. A man sat in the chair beside the window, backlit by morning light. She couldn't make out his face. Her eyes were still adjusting, her head still swimming. "You're awake," he said. She tried to respond, but her voice came out rough with disuse. She looked down at her hands, both unmarked, clean, no trace of the alley. She pulled the neckline of her shirt aside just enough to check her ribs. Nothing. Smooth skin where 7 blades had been. Her stomach turned over. What in the world? "You've been out for 3 days." He leaned forward into the light, as if answering her thought, and she finally saw his face clearly. He was the kind of man she'd imagined as a girl, reading stolen romance novels by candlelight under her blanket, inventing faces for heroes she'd never expected to meet. Dark-haired, broad-shouldered, his jaw sharp and shadowed with a few days' growth. He had a small scar at the corner of his lips, the one imperfection that somehow made him even more attractive. This was a dream. It had to be a dream. "You're safe," he said simply. "You're in the palace." "Why am I in the palace? I work at a tavern in the Shallows. I don't—" She stopped, pressed her fingers to her sternum, trying to slow her heartbeat. "Think. The alley. There were men, and I was—" The memory arrived in fragments, cold stone, the shock of the first blade, the pup's panicked eyes. "I died. Twice," he said. Something like pain moved through his expression, there and gone. "On the healer's table. The second time they had to—" His jaw tightened. "You're here. That's what's important." She looked at him. This stranger in his expensive chair, watching her with an intensity that didn't match the situation. People didn't bring tavern girls back from the dead and install them in palace bedrooms. How? She said. Why would you? Who even are you? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I'm the man whose life you saved. My name is Miles. She stared at him, confusion clouding her mind. I didn't save a man. I saved a pup. The silence that followed was very long. He held her gaze with a steadiness that felt almost like a confession, and slowly he leaned forward into the full light from the window. Arden went still. Her thoughts dissolved completely because she was looking into his eyes. Deep amber, gold brown, almost luminous in the morning light. She'd seen that color before. She'd looked into it every Tuesday for 3 weeks. That's not possible, she said. Her voice had gone strange. No, he agreed quietly. It isn't. And yet, the room seemed to rearrange itself around her. She felt the shape of something enormous pressing against the edges of her understanding. The pup, she said slowly, was the size of my forearm. He looked at her for a moment. Then, with the gravity of a man making a very serious point, I was going through something. She laughed. It came out before she could stop it, short and startled, wrong for the situation entirely. A faith smile tugged at his lips as he leaned forward, elbows on his knees. I remember everything, he said. Every time you left food, the way you turned so I could eat without being watched. His voice dropped lower. The daisies. When you had a hard day. Heat moved up her throat. She thought about the back step in the rain, how small and private that moment had felt, how completely alone she'd believed herself to be. I couldn't hold my form, he continued. Couldn't speak. I was barely conscious most of that time. But I remembered. Through all of it, every form, every blackout. His amber eyes stayed on hers. I remembered you. She sat with that for a moment. How is any of this possible? It's called the apex turning, he said. It affects one king in a bloodline, once in a century, maybe. The last was my great-great-grandfather. Because it's so rare, most of what was known about it has fractured over time, passed down in pieces. I didn't know what was happening to me when it started. What does it mean? His jaw shifted. It means I don't carry one form. I carry all of them. Wolf, eagle, lion, possibly others. Creatures older than the kingdom's name. 6 weeks ago, I woke unable to hold my shift at all. Cycling through forms I couldn't stabilize, the wrong bones trying to emerge. He paused. A king in full loss of control is an invitation to every enemy he has. So I fled the palace before anyone could see, and spent a week in the forest trying to understand what was happening to my body. And ended up in my alley? Eventually. By the second week, I could barely move. I was burning through whatever I ate trying to fuel the shifts, and I couldn't hunt properly because I couldn't hold a form long enough. Something flickered across his face. The broken leg happened when my bones tried to reorganize themselves mid-run, and a broken leg meant I couldn't maintain anything larger. He met her eyes. The pup form was the smallest, easiest to stabilize. So that's what I was. Arden looked at him, trying to reconcile his muscular frame, shoulders that barely fit the chair with the shivering pup. But you were starving, she said. Why didn't you just... She stopped. You couldn't shift to get food. Because of the leg. Yes. And every shift cost more than the last. He was quiet for a moment. By the time I found your alley, I had maybe days left. I knew it. I just couldn't do anything about it. She thought about the first night, how carefully he'd move through the garbage, how he'd nudge the bread back toward her hand before he'd take any for himself, even half-starved. How do I figure into this? She said softly. He looked at her for a long moment before he answered, like he was choosing not just the words, but how honest to be with them. The turning can't complete on its own, he said finally. It needs a catalyst. Witness selflessness. Someone who gives genuine value for something the world has decided has none. Something shifted in his expression. I was a broken, starving stray in a filthy alley. There was nothing to gain from helping me. No one would have blamed you for walking past. I wasn't thinking about that. That's why it worked. His voice had gone quieter. And those men, they were ready to gut me without a second thought. When I saw you come around that corner, something crossed his face, fierce and frustrated. I couldn't stop what happened to you, couldn't hold a form large enough to matter. I could only watch. The fire crackled between them. Arden looked down at her unmarked hands and tried to imagine it, watching from the ground, helpless. You were willing to die for me, he said. His amber eyes held hers with an intensity that felt almost too much to meet directly. I am aware that there is no adequate way to thank you for that. You brought me back, she said. It wasn't enough. It will never quite be enough. He said it simply, but I intend to spend a considerable amount of time trying. She didn't know what to do with that. And now, she said, now you're bound to me until the transformation completes. Physically, there's a range. If you go beyond it, the connection destabilizes and He stopped. You what? I lose the thread back to myself, he said quietly. The forms are each their own mind. The eagle wants solitude. The lion wants dominance. Without an anchor point, I can't always find my way back to human. A pause. You're my anchor point. A weight settled on Arden's chest. She pressed her fingers against her chest without thinking. That's not a small thing to tell someone. No, Miles agreed. It isn't. She looked at him. This king with his careful posture and those amber eyes she had looked into while she bled out on cobblestones. She waited for resentment to arrive. Bound, tethered, no choice in the matter. It didn't come. What came instead was something she was considerably less prepared for. The awareness that he was watching her the way no one had ever watched her before, like she was something worth the attention. What do you need from me? She said, specifically, while we wait for it to complete. Your presence, that's all. Stay within the palace grounds. Be near enough that the bond stays stable. I won't ask anything else of you. It was a clean answer, but she had the feeling it was also incomplete, that there was something sitting just behind it that he'd chosen not to say. As if reading her mind, he continued. In exchange, I want you to have everything you should have always had. A room that's warm, clothes that fit, food that isn't whatever's left at the end of a shift. His amber eyes stayed on hers, steady and unhurried, like he meant every word of it. Whatever you've gone without, I'd like to change that, if you'll let me. She looked at him for a long moment. The girl who had grown up in the Shallows knew better than to believe in kings bearing gifts. The Shallows beat the fairy tales out of you early. Wanting things too much was just a head start on being disappointed. But there was an earnestness in his eyes that chased off her wariness. Then his gaze dropped, just for a moment, to her lips. She looked away, smoothed the silk over her knee. Tell me about the forms, she said. When she looked back at him, she saw his eyes were warm with something that looked like relief, like a question he'd been holding for 3 days had finally been answered. And then, briefly, unexpectedly, a smile, small and unguarded, sharp canines gleaming in the light before he reined it back in. It reminded her of the amber-eyed pup scarfing down bread, trying very hard not to show how much it was starving. The memory moved through her chest as he told her about his condition. In the days that followed, they settled into an arrangement that neither of them named. Arden could go explore anywhere in the palace, and Miles's staff treated her with a careful courtesy that suggested he had been very clear about it. The food was the strangest part. Every meal, plates arrived that she couldn't finish. She knew she couldn't finish them, and yet each night she wrapped something small in a cloth and tucked it in the drawer of her nightstand. A heel of bread, a piece of fruit, a square of cheese. It was muscle memory from growing up in the shallows when you couldn't be sure about tomorrow. On the third day, following a corridor she hadn't tried yet, she stopped in the doorway for a long moment before she went in. The palace library greeted her, enormous, shelves climbing higher than candlelight could properly reach. Arden stood very still and let herself breathe in the books. Somewhere inside her, the little girl who had read stolen novels by candlelight and pressed her nose to bookseller windows she could never afford to enter, felt something bloom open. She was reaching for a volume on the highest shelf, balanced on her toes, fingers just grazing the spine, when she heard the door. She turned, still reaching, and Miles reached past her for the same book. His hand brushed hers. The warmth that moved through her was startling in its specificity. It landed in the center of her chest like a coal dropped into still water, radiating outward, and her breath caught. She watched him go completely still, his amber eyes flaring. When he turned his head, they were intimately close. The narrow gap between the shelves not built for two people. Neither of them moved. Her heart was doing something embarrassing she was certain he could hear. Then she saw it, just for a moment before he controlled it. Something like pure hunger flared in his eyes, and above it, a flicker at the top of his head like wolf ears poking through before smoothing away. He reached up slowly and took the book from the shelf, the one she'd been reaching for, and held it out to her. An excuse to stay close for one moment longer before he stepped back. She took the book. She was very careful not to touch him again. Miles, for his part, was having a considerably worse time of it. The bond had been clawing at him since she woke, a persistent, unreasonable pressure that his wolf had very strong opinions about. Wolf had decided that she was his and was prepared to make this everyone's problem. "She's right there," the wolf observed, for the 14th time that hour, with the energy of someone who had just made an extraordinary discovery. "In our library, reading our books. We should nothing," Miles thought back. "She's so pretty. The prettiest. Our prettiest." "Just a sniff," his wolf suggested, in a tone that implied this was an extremely reasonable compromise. "Absolutely not. A very small sniff. She wouldn't even notice. She would absolutely notice, and then she would leave, and I would deserve it. Stop." His wolf subsided, wounded. The harder truth was that Miles wanted to tell her everything. The bond, what it meant for her, what it meant for him, the full weight of what she'd stumbled into when she'd fed a starving pup on a back step. She deserved to know all of it. But there were things he hadn't told her yet. Things about the turning, about what it asked of the people caught up in it, that he was still trying to find a way to say without. He stopped the thought there. He needed more time. He needed to know she was safe first, that the bond was stable, that she wasn't going to bolt the moment she understood the full shape of what she'd agreed to. He was aware this was not entirely fair to her. He was working on it. He stepped back, gave her the book, watched her take it without meeting his eyes. His wolf made a mournful sound. Miles ignored it, with great effort, and left the library. For the rest of the day, Arden was exquisitely aware of where Miles was in every room, a new strange sense that tracked him like a compass needle finding north. That evening, she felt him 3 floors away in the council chambers, tense, controlled, the pressure of a headache building, and spent an irritating 20 minutes trying not to notice. But she was definitely noticing. She saw what he was capable of, and it rearranged her understanding of him. Not in the way the court saw him. She'd heard enough in corridors to know his counsel feared him with a specific, targeted dread. In front of formal company, he was precise and cold, and had the kind of authority that felt more dangerous than anger. His general's eyes went careful when he gave orders, like they were afraid of what would happen if any detail was forgotten. He was clearly not a gentleman by nature, which made her other findings so startling. Like in the eastern courtyard, a wounded hawk had been brought in, one wing dragging, and Miles was sitting cross-legged on the stones in his formal council clothes, the hawk settled in his lap. He set the wing with a focus that looked like tenderness, his hands impossibly careful, speaking to the bird in a low, continuous murmur she couldn't make out from where she stood. The hawk went still under his touch. Then Miles looked up and found her watching. A gentle smile lit his face, a flash of something self-conscious, quickly smoothed away. She said nothing, but her chest panged with a feeling she didn't have a word for yet. That night, making her way back to her room, the lantern on the wall of her corridor suddenly went out. She would have thought nothing of it. Palace staff, a draft, any number of explanations. Except when she reached for it, she found the oil reservoir bone dry. Someone had emptied it, which left her at the top of a long stone staircase in complete darkness. She pressed her hand to the wall and went up slowly, one step at a time, and told herself it was just a coincidence. 2 floors up, Miles's wolf was having a revelation. She saw us, it said, with the breathless energy of someone reporting breaking news. With the hawk. She saw us being soft. I'm aware, Miles thought back, still writing the trade report he was supposed to have finished an hour ago. Do you think she liked it? The wolf asked. The soft? Do women like soft? I have no idea. We should do it again, the wolf decided. Somewhere she can see? We could find another hawk? We are not manufacturing injured wildlife to impress her. What about a rabbit? Something small? No. The wolf went quiet for a moment. Then, with a different energy entirely, aggrieved, almost sulky, she met us as a pup. A limping, half-starved, rain-soaked pup. That was her first impression of us. We were the size of her forearm, Miles. Her forearm. I remember. We should show her something big. The lion, maybe. Women like lions. Very heroic. Very large. Or the eagle. We could fly her somewhere with a view. Show her we're not just a scruffy little thing. She fed us every night, Miles thought back, before he could stop himself. I think she liked the scruffy little thing. His wolf paused. That's what worries me. What do you mean? She watched us sneeze and lose our dignity on a back step, Miles. She fed us like a sickly child. How do we come back from that? We are not mate material in her eyes. Miles had no immediate answer. The eagle, his wolf said finally, with resolve. When we master it, we fly her somewhere. Let her see what we truly are. Miles picked up his pen again. Agreed, he thought. We'll show her something that isn't a pup. The next morning, Arden went to the stables. Miles had mentioned she was welcome to ride, and she needed air and movement and something to do with her hands. The horse was already saddled. She was pulling on her gloves when habit made her check the girth strap. A shallow's instinct, trust nothing you didn't fasten yourself, and found it had been cut most of the way through. Cleanly. Not frayed, not worn. Cut. She stood very still in the empty stable for a long moment. Then she went to find Miles. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he was quiet in the way that meant he was holding something back, and she watched his wolf push close to the surface of his expression. Not the cold council rage, but something rawer, more personal. Don't ride alone, he said. Not until I know who did this. Please. It was the please that stayed with her for the rest of the day, as she returned to the comforts of the library. Arden woke the following morning with the strangest feeling yet, a bright, restless energy humming at the edges of her consciousness, pulling her out of sleep before the light had properly arrived. She lay still for a moment, trying to locate it. Not dread, not pain, something like joy, except it wasn't hers. Ever since they had their encounter in the library, Arden had been experiencing waves of emotions that arrived without origin, finding their way into her chest like letters slipped under a door. Was it Miles? She was sitting up in bed, still trying to untangle his mood from hers, when he appeared in the doorway. He was wind-chilled, his hair messy in a way she'd never seen it, catching his breath. His face had shed its usual careful control. He looked younger, bright-eyed, like something extraordinary had just happened to him. He saw her and stopped. She became very aware that she was still in her nightclothes, her hair loose, blankets pooled around her waist. Heat raced up the back of her neck. "I'm sorry," he said, and to his credit, he kept his eyes on her face. "I should have knocked. Something moved through his expression that she felt simultaneously in her own chest. "I wanted you to know first." "Know what?" she said. "My eagle form. Let me show you," he said. He looked so eager, so proud, she couldn't bear to say no. So she reached for her coat. His shift happened on the palace roof, which was the most terrifying and spectacular thing she had ever witnessed up close. The sound of it, bones resetting, the enormous percussion of eagle wings extending, sent her heart galloping. And then he was there, enormous and dark-feathered, his wingspan casting them both in shadow. His amber eyes found her immediately. She took a small step back without meaning to. "Will you drop me?" The eagle went very still. Then, with a gesture that could only be described as offended, he lowered himself, slowly, carefully, until his whole body was folded close to the ground, his great dark head dipping toward her in something that was unmistakably a bow. He held the position, as if he intended to stay there until she believed him. She climbed onto his back. The launch stopped her breath entirely. She pressed flat against the warmth of him, his feathers silk and strength against her cheek, the city wheeling below with dizzying speed. Then they broke through the fog, and it was only sky. Light poured down in sheets. The kingdom spread beneath them, forest and river and the white stone of the capital, and the cold at that altitude was sharp enough to bring tears to her eyes. She started laughing without deciding to. The sound ripped away in the wind, and she didn't care. She pressed close to the feathers beneath her and called into the rush of air. "You're magnificent." She felt it move through him, a wave of pride swelling up through his whole body beneath her. When they landed in the meadow beyond the city walls, the grass silver with dew, she slid from his back. His shift back to human happened quickly. She spun around on instinct, heat already climbing her throat. "There are clothes," he said, his voice rough, quietly amused. "Behind you, in the satchel." She kept her eyes very firmly on the tree line. She heard the soft sounds of him dressing, which did not help. She had seen, more than a suggestion, if she was being honest with herself. The broad lines of his shoulders, the lean of his waist, the particular way the gray morning light had settled on him before she'd turned. She'd seen enough that her cheeks were flaming. "You can turn around," he said, and she could hear the smile in it. He was watching her, hair wild with wind, shirt not yet fully laced, that small scar at the corner of his lips catching the light. She felt the color in her cheeks deepen. "Most people who first see that form run," he said. "I'm not most people," she managed. "That's right." His eyes moved over her face. "You called me magnificent. Maybe I was caught up in the moment. I think you meant it. You're very sure of yourself." "No." The amusement faded, replaced by something quieter. He took a slow breath. My wolf has been worried that you think of me as the pup. His amber eyes stayed on hers. That you look at me and see something to be looked after, not... He stopped. The meadow was very quiet. Not a man, she finished softly. She looked at him, wind-blown, earnest, trying very hard to hold his expression steady, and thought about the library, the hawk, the way he always seemed to find a reason to be in whatever room she was in. I haven't thought of you as a pup, she said, for quite some time. Relief rippled across his face, and beneath it, something warmer, more careful, like a door opening, slowly, not sure yet of its welcome. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering against her jaw. What about now? He said quietly. She held his gaze. Her heart was trying to leap out of her chest. Now, she said, I think you already know. He looked at her for a long moment, his fingers still warm against her jaw, and she thought, this is the part where something happens. In the novels, it was always here, in a meadow, in the early light, when the man looked at the woman like that. But something flickered behind his eyes then, brief and dark, quickly gone. His hand dropped. He looked out at the tree line, and the door she'd watched open closed again. There are things I haven't told you yet, he said quietly, about the turning, about what comes next. He turned back to her, and his expression was honest in a way that made her chest tighten. I want to, when I know how. She studied him and nodded once. Then, before she could think better of it, she rose onto her toes and pressed her lips to his cheek. Brief and warm, just a breath of contact. She felt him go completely still. When she pulled back, he turned his head, and his lips found her temple. Slow and deliberate, his hand coming up to curve lightly around the back of her neck. He stayed there for a moment longer than she expected. She felt him breathe against her hair. Then he stepped back. His eyes were very dark. Time to take you back, he said quietly. Best sniff ever, his wolf said, the moment they were airborne. Subtle, dignified. She did not even suspect. I'm glad you approve, Miles thought back. She leaned into it. His wolf continued. Did you feel that? She leaned in. That means... I know what it means. His wolf subsided, still glowing, turning the memory over like something precious, polishing it from every angle. She smells like home, he said finally. Miles stayed quiet, but somewhere over the silver meadow, banking into the autumn fog with her warm weight against his back, he knew he was falling for her. And underneath that, quieter and colder, the knowledge of what he still hadn't told her, what the turning yet required, what it had cost the men before him, and what it might yet cost her. High Priestess Calantha had the kind of face people trusted immediately, soft-spoken, sorrowful, always in the process of worrying about someone other than herself. She wore her concern for the king like a vest. She had been his spiritual advisor for 9 years. Arden liked her, at first. That was the honest truth of it. Calantha was the first person in the palace who spoke to her like she was simply a person, not the king's strange guest to be carefully managed. She asked about the Shallows with what seemed like genuine interest, remembered the details, asked follow-up questions the next time they met. She brought Arden a specific tea one morning, unprompted. I heard you've been having trouble sleeping. This helped me once during a difficult time. But gradually, Arden, who had grown up reading people out of necessity, began to notice troubling details. It wasn't anything obvious. Calantha never moved in ways that read as threatening. She was precisely as she appeared, attentive, devout, deeply concerned about what the apex turning was doing to the king. The transformation is unprecedented, she told the council. The transformation is dangerous. We don't know yet what he'll become. The council listened to her with the gravity due a woman who had guided 2 kings through crises. But twice in 1 week, Arden caught her in conversation with Lord Fenwick, a council member who had been voting consistently to have Miles restrained for safety, their voices dropping to nothing when Arden came around the corner. So she started paying more attention. The first incident happened during a state dinner. Miles had been managing the transformation privately for weeks, learning to hold the line when all the animal forms pressed against him. With her as his anchor, he had grown remarkably good at it. The control was extraordinary. She could feel in her chest how much it cost him, every meal and meeting a careful exercise in staying human, yet his face showed none of it. But he hadn't ever been tested in a room of 50 people. She watched him from across the table in the early part of the evening and thought he was managing. He was composed, measured, working the room like a king. Nobody looking at him would have seen anything wrong. Then she felt it before she saw it, a sudden crack in the bond, like a window shattering, the eagle's instincts slamming up against the noise and heat of the crowded room. Too many people. Too close. The eagle wanted sky and silence, and it wanted them now. His hands on the table went wrong, the fingers too sharp, the knuckles too angular, there and gone in a moment. Then his shoulders, a brief, terrible suggestion of something vast trying to emerge. The woman beside him pushed back her chair and recoiled. The man across from him went pale, and Miles's eyes, gold bright, too bright, burning with something that was clearly not human. The table had gone very still. A few of the older lords had reached the same conclusion simultaneously and were deciding whether to reach for the swords at their belts. Arden was already moving. She crossed the room, said his name, quietly, just his name. The way she'd learned worked better than anything else. He turned. His eyes found hers, and she saw the struggle in them, the man fighting to stay in front of the thing pressing against him. She put her hand over his on the table and held it. His hand was burning hot, the temperature he ran now during the transformation. She thought of rain and the back step, and the first cold morning she'd left water out for a limping pup, and she felt it move through the bond toward him like light under a door. The gold receded from his eyes. Slowly, then all at once, his shoulders dropped. His hands came back to themselves. She became aware, in the ringing silence, of 50 people staring, some frightened, some fascinated, and Calantha across the room. Arden catalogued her expression carefully. Not relief, not surprise. Something that had been waiting, patient and still, for exactly this. Calculation. "Thank you," Miles whispered under his breath. His voice was rough. "You were doing fine," Arden said, which was a lie, and he knew it, but something in his eyes softened anyway. 2 nights later, she was heading back from the council wing when someone stepped out of a doorway behind her. She heard it, the particular quality of a footfall trying to be silent, and moved without thinking, the way the Shallows had taught her, putting the wall at her back before she'd made a conscious decision about it. The corridor was empty. Whoever it was had gone. She stood there with her heart loud in her ears and thought about a dry lantern at the top of a staircase, a cut-girth strap in an empty stable. And now this, 3 times in 3 weeks. She didn't go back to her room. She went to the archive instead. Miles had mentioned his great-great-grandfather's journals in passing once, and she'd wanted to understand the transformation better. Instead, she found something else first. A thin volume in a locked case. The apex turning. A complete record. Not fragments, not legend, but clinical documentation. Every detail of the transformation, its stages, its requirements, its completion conditions. And at the back were 3 names, 3 Alpha Kings in the last 3 centuries, who should have completed the turning. None of them had survived. In each case, the record noted, spiritual oversight provided by the High Priestess of the Order of Celestine. 3 turnings, 3 dead kings, 3 different women, and yet the same title, the same order. Calantha was the current high priestess. A chill raced down Arden's spine. The notes on the second king were the most detailed. His anchor had been murdered, an apparent accident. Without the anchor, the turning had no guide point, and the king had been lost to his forms within days. She sat with the volume in her lap for a long time, reading it 3 times, making sure she understood what she was looking at. The order had been present at every failed turning. The order had the full documentation of the process, while the palace had only fragments. The order knew exactly how to stop it. And currently, a woman from the order had access to the king's private council, his meals, his daily schedule. She found Miles in his study and told him everything, laying the volumes on his desk one by one. He went very still as she spoke. When she finished, the room was very quiet. 9 years, he said finally. Not a question. She could see him doing the arithmetic, running back through every meal, every council meeting. Every morning he'd woken feeling slightly less than himself and attributed it to the turning. His jaw tightened. She's been poisoning me for 9 years. Slowly, Arden confirmed. There's a compound documented in the records. They kept meticulous notes, which is either arrogance or certainty. It doesn't kill outright. It corrupts the turning from the inside, building over time, so that when the final stage arrives, she held his gaze. You go feral instead of completing the transition. You become something that can't be reasoned with, something dangerous. She paused. And then they step in, and they say they had no choice. The silence that followed was enormous. She almost convinced the council to chain me, Miles said. Presented it as mercy, containment for my own safety. Something moved through his expression, cold and precise. She's been building toward this under my nose. You didn't know? Arden hesitated. Then, Miles, the men in the alley. He looked at her. I don't think that was coincidence. I think she knew where you were. I think she'd been tracking you, and she sent them to finish it quietly while you were too weak to defend yourself. The temperature in the room climbed several degrees. I suppose she didn't account for me, Arden continued. Nobody in the shallows runs toward 3 armed men in the dark. She kept her voice even. But I did. She met his eyes. Which means I'm now a problem she needs to solve. Your accidents, Miles said. I heard someone in the corridors earlier. That may have been my 3rd warning. She stopped. She's not panicking. She's methodical. She'll keep trying until I'm taken out. Miles stood abruptly. The air in the room shifted. She felt it on her skin, the particular charge that preceded a shift, his wolf pressing close to the surface. Not yet, she said. Arden, there's something I haven't told you. He stopped, jaw working. Not about Calantha, not about the order, but the turning, the risks of it, what it's done to kings before me. He looked at her. I knew it was dangerous. Why didn't you share them with me? I thought the anchor was supposed to be protected, shielded by the bond itself. That's what the fragments suggested. I told myself you were safer not knowing the full weight of it. His voice had dropped, stripped of its usual careful control. And I didn't want you to look at me the way you looked at the pup, like something that needed to be kept alive. I wanted to be the one to protect you. You should have trusted me, she said softly. I'm not fragile, Miles. I never have been. Something in his expression broke open, just slightly. Yes, I know that now, but she tried to hurt you 3 times. I have to eliminate Calantha, Arden. But if you move on her now, her allies in the council scatter, and we lose the evidence trail back to the order entirely. Arden held his gaze. We need her to think she's still winning. 3 days. Enough time for me to copy everything from the archive, document every attempt on my life, and get it all in front of the council members you trust. We do this properly, with evidence, so that when she falls, she takes the whole order down with her. A pause. Can you do that? Sit across from her at dinner and give her nothing. I've been doing it for 9 years without knowing, he said. 3 days, then we end it, together. She held his gaze until she felt the temperature in the room begin, slowly, to drop. Can you give me 3 days? He looked at her with deep longing. I'd give you considerably more than that. Good, she said. Then let's get to work. She woke at 3 a.m. to the sound of breaking stone. A tidal wave of pain seized her chest, vast and animal-like, coming from 2 floors below. She was out of bed and moving before she was fully awake, down the corridor and the stairs and into the lower training hall, where she stopped in the doorway and understood why she'd heard breaking stone. Miles had put his fist through the wall. He was in the center of the room in the aftermath of something catastrophic. Furniture overturned, the training dummies scattered, his shirt gone and his bare back to her, breathing in deep, controlled efforts. In the torchlight, she could see his shoulder blades moving, the way they moved when the eagle tried to emerge, and beneath his skin, shadows of things that weren't quite right, forms wanting out. Miles, she whispered. He went absolutely rigid. I'm here. She walked toward him, kept her voice level, felt through the bond the lion's instincts snarling in him, and underneath it the terrible fear of his own mind. I've got you. Arden. Her name through his teeth, a warning. Don't come closer. Too late. She put her hand on his back. A great shudder moved through him. He dropped his head forward and she felt the forms recede through the bond, one by one, like a tide going out, as she pressed her palm flat against the heat of his spine and stood there in the dark while he found his way back to himself. When he turned, she didn't step back. His eyes were coming down from gold. He was breathing hard, his expression wrecked with the exhaustion of someone who had been fighting himself for hours. Calantha must have given me something at dinner, he said. I could feel it afterward, the poison working faster than usual. His jaw tightened. She's accelerating the timeline. Because she knows we're getting close to the final stage. Arden's hand was still on his chest, feeling his heartbeat slow toward normal. She's panicking. She should be, Miles said quietly. His hand came up to cover hers, large and very warm. I keep thinking about the second king in those records. His anchor was killed, and he spent his last days completely alone, not knowing what he'd become. Arden looked up at him. A king accepts the risks of the crown, Miles said quietly. I understood even as a boy what I was walking into. It's mine to carry. His voice dropped lower. But you were feeding a stray in an alley. You weren't supposed to be in any of this. And now she's trying to kill you in my palace because of me. Pain broke through his face, the guilt of a man who had been turning this over for days. You didn't choose this. I didn't give you the chance to. You've given me something I didn't know I was missing, she continued. Purpose. A reason to be in a room that matters. She looked at him, at the king who set broken wings with careful hands, who had been a starving pup in an alley and was becoming something the world had never seen before. And I have watched you, Miles, in every form, the wolf and the eagle, and the man who is learning to hold all of it together. I am so proud of who you are becoming. Besides, I'm not easy to kill, she finished. Established fact. 7 blades. His fingers tightened around hers. After this is over, he said, I'm going to have a great deal to say to you. I can't wait. Little did they know, Calantha had already seen what was coming. The final stage arrived like a storm front, 2 days earlier than they'd expected. Arden heard the alarm go up from the council wing and felt through the bond, simultaneously, the sudden cataclysmic surge of the final stage washing over through Miles like a wave breaking. She ran. The sacred temple beneath the palace was where the records said the final ritual had to happen. The old chamber at the mountain's root, carved out by the first king before there was a palace above it. Arden reached it to find Miles already there. He was kneeling in the center of the chamber floor with the expression of a man holding back an ocean with his bare hands. Around him, the air itself was wrong, rippling, the stone vibrating, torches bending toward him like lodestones. His eyes, when they found hers, were amber all the way through. "It's time," he said. His voice was barely his. "I know." She crossed the chamber to him, knelt in front of him. "Look at me. Miles, look at me, not at whatever you're looking at." His gaze fought its way back to her face. "There you are," she said softly. Behind her, the temple door blew open. Calantha stood in the entrance, and for the first time her face showed what it actually was beneath the sorrowful concern. Something hungry and old, a woman who had held power for decades and was not about to lose it now. 3 guards at her back, and a vial in her hand, dark liquid, the accelerant. "Step away from him," she said to Arden. "It's over. He's too far into it. Even if you complete the ritual, the poison has already done its work. He'll emerge feral. He'll be put down within the hour." Her voice was almost gentle. "There's a mercy in it." "There's a mercy in it," Arden repeated in disbelief. "You're a dockside girl from a poor district who got caught up in something she doesn't understand. Walk away. I'll make sure you're compensated." "Walk away? Is that what happened to the other anchors? The ones your order removed?" Calantha moved her thumb over the vial. "If I die," she said, "this releases into the air. The poison dispersed is 10 times more potent than ingested. He's too far into the final stage. It will finish him within the hour." Her voice was almost gentle. "So, you'll let me walk out of here, or you'll watch him die in front of you." Behind Arden, Miles made a sound that wasn't human. Arden looked at the vial. Small, dark, a thumb's width of liquid that had already been quietly destroying him for 9 years in careful measured doses. Dispersed into the air of this enclosed stone chamber, with Miles already deep in the final stage, it would be over before the palace guard could reach them. Calantha knew it. That was why she was smiling. Arden looked at her, this woman who had no qualms about murder, and felt something clarify in her chest. Cold and simple, and completely certain. She understood, in that moment, what the records had said about the selflessness requirement. Not just her original sacrifice in the alley. The transformation was a living process, completed through continued selflessness, and the ritual would reflect whatever she brought to it in this moment. A genuine choice to protect someone else at cost to herself. She stepped toward Calantha. "What are you doing?" Calantha said, and for the first time her voice had an edge of uncertainty. "Making sure you don't drop that vial," Arden said. "I'm not going to." "You will." Arden kept moving, steady and unhurried. "Because in about 3 seconds, your guard is going to realize that the council's men have just entered the corridor behind him. He's going to panic and grab for you. And when he does, you'll stumble, and you'll drop it, and Miles dies." She held Calantha's gaze. "So before that happens, give it to me." Calantha's eyes flicked to the corridor. She heard it a moment later. Boots on stone, multiple sets, closing in. Her composure cracked for just a moment. The guard behind her heard it too. He grabbed for Calantha's arm to pull her back, too hard, too fast, the panic of a man whose exit was closing. and Calantha lurched forward with the vial still uncorked in her hand. Arden moved. She caught Calantha with one arm around her back and closed her other hand over the woman's fist, over the vial, over the fingers wrapped around it, pressing the cork back in place before the liquid could meet the air. They stood there tangled together, breathing hard. Calantha stared at her from 3 inches away. For the first time, her face showed something that hadn't been planned or practiced. Pure shock. She had just been caught, steadied, saved from her own stumble by the woman she had been trying to kill. "She's in custody," Arden said to the guard calmly. "Not yours, the council's. Take her to Lord Aldrich and tell him what she's done." She held Calantha's gaze. All of it. The king's before this one. The order's records. Everything. The guard took Calantha's arm, and she let herself be led, spine straight, chin level, performing dignity until the very last moment, because that was what she was, and what she had always been. A performance. The door closed behind them. Arden turned back to Miles. He was watching her with amber eyes and a face that was barely holding its human shape, all the forms pressing hard against the surface, and she could feel through the bond the poison working against him. But she could also feel what the last 60 seconds had done to the ritual space. The chamber felt different, cleaner. She came back to him, knelt, took both his hands in hers, and held on. "I'm ready," she said. "Arden." Her name torn out of him. "If this doesn't, it's going to work." She squeezed his hands. "I know you're in there. Every form of you, wolf, eagle, whatever else. They all know me, right?" A pause. Then ragged. "Yes." "Then find me on the other side." She held his gaze. "Don't get lost." The ritual took her like a wave takes a shore, except all at once and everywhere. Light poured through the bond, then heat, then something that had no name but pressed against the inside of her ribs like it was trying to find more room. She felt the wolf first, its loyalty fierce and warm, the specific devotion of a creature that had chosen her and would never be moved. Then the eagle, vast and solitary, carrying in its chest a love of sky so acute it ached. Then the lion, its protectiveness so bone deep it felt ancient, older than the palace, older than the kingdom. And underneath all of them, the man, afraid of what he was becoming, reaching for her anyway, hand outstretched in the dark, trusting her to be there. Arden held on. Her arms shook. Her vision went white at the edges, and then white everywhere, and still she held on, fingers locked through his, because somewhere in the white she could still feel him, and that was enough. She held on until the bond between them was no longer bond but bridge, no longer tether but home. Then Miles, not the broken pup from the alley, not the cold king with careful control. Something new, kneeling in front of her, head bowed, breathing. When he raised his eyes, they were amber and human all at once, both things fully present, neither at war with the other. Arden looked at him, trying to take in every detail. His hands in hers, warm and steady. The sharp line of his jaw, the scar at the corner of his lips, the rise and fall of his chest. She reached out and touched his face, just her palm against his cheek, checking. He turned into it immediately, eyes closing for a moment, like something in him needed that as much as she did. "You're here," she said. Her voice came out unsteady. "I'm here. All of me." She looked him over once more, and that was when she saw it, a small glimmer just behind his ear, catching the torchlight. "Tiny scale," she said, "behind your ear." He reached up, found it, held it out between them in his palm, small, iridescent, the first sign of the dragon he hadn't yet fully explored. He stared at it for a moment. Then he laughed, enormous and free and completely unguarded. It filled the whole stone chamber, and Arden felt it move through the bond like light. His forehead dropped to hers, his hands came up to frame her face. I said I have a great deal to say to you, he murmured. That was the deal. Let me start with this. He kissed her. It wasn't tentative. He kissed her like the decision had been made a long time ago, and he was done waiting. One hand curved around her jaw, tilting her face up to his, the other sliding into her hair. She felt the bond flare between them like a struck match, and kissed him back with everything she had, her fingers twisting over his chest, pulling him closer. When she parted her lips, he made a low sound against her mouth and deepened the kiss, slow and deliberate, his thumb tracing her jaw like he had all the time in the world and intended to use it. When they finally broke apart, both of them breathing hard, he didn't go far. His forehead dropped to hers, his hands still framing her face, thumb still moving against her cheek, like he wasn't quite ready to stop touching her. She used tongue, his wolf said immediately. I was there, Miles thought back. She tastes exquisite, his wolf continued, with great reverence. Like the finest. Don't finish that sentence. I'm just saying, exquisite. If we used a little more tongue, we could really... I'm not taking kissing advice from you. More, his wolf continued, deeply earnest. We need more. Miles looked at Arden, her lips curved at the corner, and thought that for once, he and his wolf were in complete and total agreement. 6 months later, Arden stood on the back step of the Russet Anchor and barely recognized the street in front of her. That was Miles's doing, though he'd been careful, always, to call it hers. In the first weeks after the turning completed, when the council was still finding its footing and Calantha's allies were being quietly removed one by one, he had come to her with maps. Actual maps of the shallows, spread across his desk, covered in his neat handwriting. Questions in the margins. Water access here. Is this accurate? School-age children in this district. Do you have a sense of the numbers? Nobody had ever asked her these things before. Nobody had ever assumed she would know. She told him everything. Every broken cistern and crooked landlord and unlit street she'd navigated for 20 years. And he had listened with the focused attention he gave to things that mattered, and then he had acted. Not with grand announcements. Quietly, methodically, the way he did everything. New housing where the warehouse had been. A water cistern 2 streets over. A school for the orphans, its windows lit from within on winter evenings so the whole street glowed. Arden's former boss had been discovered, pocketing the water tax since before Arden was born. That had been Miles's doing too, a quiet audit she hadn't asked for. The new boss had asked Arden's advice on the menu. She'd given it freely, and found she had more opinions about it than she'd expected. Arden sat in on council sessions now, not officially as his mate, not yet, though she'd caught Miles looking at her across the chamber table with an expression that suggested not yet had a shorter shelf life than she might think. She heard him land before she turned, his great eagle form, dark-feathered and enormous, dropping into the courtyard with the grace he'd spent 6 months mastering. Then the shift, fluid now where it had once been choppy. She couldn't help but peek and admire as he reached for the clothes she'd left folded on the courtyard wall for him, a habit they'd settled into without discussing it, like most of their best habits. He crossed to her. She was sitting on the back step of the Russet Anchor, the same step, the same alley where it had all begun. He looked at it for a moment before he sat down. Then he settled beside her, on the step that wasn't quite big enough for 2 people, which meant they were pressed together from shoulder to knee. I've been thinking, he said, which was how he started things he'd been thinking about for weeks. He held something out. She looked down. A small clutch of white daisies, slightly lopsided, clearly hand-gathered, one stem shorter than the rest. The same flowers he'd dropped on a back step in the rain, in another life, when he'd been the size of her forearm. Her throat closed at the memory. I couldn't speak then, he said quietly, turning to look at her fully. I mean to remedy that now, if you'll let me. She looked at him and felt her vision blur with tears. I want to ask you something, Arden. He reached into his coat a second time, and she saw it. Small, simple, a ring set with a stone the precise amber of his eyes. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of choosing this? Choosing me? Knowing every form of me, every dark corner, every secret I've since told you. The corner of his mouth moved, barely. The dragon scale included. Arden laughed, wet and undignified and completely beyond her control. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth. Yes, 1,000 times. Yes. Miles slid the ring onto her finger, and then he pulled her in and kissed her forehead and held her there, breathing her in. You smell so good, he murmured, and she could feel him smiling against her hair. She leaned into him. He tucked her closer. Above them, a hawk circled once in the autumn sky and flew on. We should get her more daisies, his wolf said in a voice of pure joy. Immediately. Many daisies. A truly unreasonable number of... Tomorrow, Miles thought. And the day after, his wolf continued. And every day after that. Home, Arden thought. She had spent 20 years thinking she knew what that word meant. But it wasn't the shallows. It wasn't the palace. It wasn't any place with walls. It was the pup who had pressed against her leg in the rain. The eagle who had folded itself to the ground so she would feel safe enough to climb on. It was every form of Miles. The ones she knew and the dragon she was still learning alongside him. The ring was warm on her finger. The daisies were in her lap. The school windows glowed gold at the end of the street. Home at last, she said softly. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. I read each one. And if you haven't yet, please consider subscribing. It's free, and it helps more people find these stories.